Pursuant to House Rule 10.01, I call this remote meeting of the House Higher Education Finance and Policy Committee to order. The CLA will take the roll to determine which members are present. Ms. Schmalz, you may begin.
Chair Bernardi.
Present.
Bernardi, present. Vice Chair Christensen.
Present.
Christensen, present. Representative O'Neill.
O'Neill, present.
O'Neill, present. Representative Albright.
Present.
Albright, present. Representative Daniels.
Present.
Daniels, present. Representative Erickson.
Present.
Erickson, present. Representative Hansen.
Hansen, present.
Hansen, present. Representative Heinzman.
Heitzman, present.
Heinzman, present. Representative Howard. Representative Howard. Representative Keeler.
Keeler, present.
Keeler, present. Representative Cleavorn.
Cleavorn, present.
Cleavorn, present. Representative Kosnick.
Osnick, present.
Kosnick, present. Representative Kreshaw.
Present.
Kreshaw, present. Representative Mason.
Present.
Mason, present. Representative Meckland. Representative Meckland. Representative Noor. Representative Noor. Representative Sandell.
Present.
Sandell, present. Representative Sandsted.
Sandsted, present.
Sandsted, present. Representative Thompson.
Thompson, present.
Thompson, present. Representative Howard.
Howard, present.
Howard, present. Representative Meckland. Representative Noor. And a quorum is present.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes for February 9th, 2021?
Madam Chair, I move those minutes for approval.
Thank you. Representative Sandsted moves approval of the minutes for February 9th, 2021. Is there any discussion? Representative Erickson.
Oh, no, Madam Chair, I want to ask a question after we approve the minutes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails and the minutes for February 9th, 2020 are approved. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to bring up something I didn't get a chance to mention yesterday during our discussion about the AccuPlacer and students having to take developmental courses, that in statute in the K-12 or E-12, I guess we call it today, section of law 120B.30 is the definition of career and college ready. So it is incumbent upon K-12 to ensure that students who enroll in colleges are ready based on that definition. And that definition is pretty specific about what they have accomplished. Furthermore, in the higher ed section of law 136F.302, under regulating the assignment of students to remedial courses, members need to read through that because there's definitely in law the fact that you cannot force a student to take remedial if they fall under these conditions that are outlined in subdivision 1, paragraph B and subdivision 1A. So I just wanted to make sure that members understood that in our discussion about the AccuPlacer, because students do have due process in that there is in law those ways for them to avoid remedial courses that for which they have to pay and they get no credit. So I just wanted to make that fact known. Thank you.
Thank you. Today we have a presentation from the University of Minnesota who will give us an overview of their budget and their budget allocation process. I know we have a lot of new and returning members on this committee, and we want to give everyone a chance to learn more about our system and the budgets that they operate. We will pause to take questions from members at the end of each section of the presentation. We have two presenters with us today, starting with Associate Vice President Julie Tonneson. Ms. Tonneson, welcome back to our committee. And following Ms. Tonneson, um, Myron Franz, the Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations. It's just kind of hard to stumble. You want to say commissioner before that name. And so he will be following after Ms. Tonneson. So welcome to our committee. Please proceed, Ms. Tonneson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. Hang on, I'm going to get my notes up here. I am, as Chair Bernardi mentioned, I am the budget director for the University of Minnesota, and I have been asked today to walk you through some information about the university's budget. We wanted to share with you the plan for roughly the next 30 to 45 minutes. If you'll advance the slide, please. We have the agenda here on the material we're going to cover. I'll need to move pretty quickly to hit the highlights, but we will provide an overview of the roughly $4 billion budget, touching on what makes up that budget in terms of revenues, focusing in on a few particular items that might be of interest to you perhaps. And then we'll also touch on total expenditures. And for the second half of our time, we will talk about the budget process, how we make decisions on the budget inside the university, and we'll provide a general explanation of our budget model and how it all kind of comes together. Of course, we are happy to take questions. As the chair mentioned, I will pause after sections to see if there are questions, and I'm happy to do that at the end as well. So with that, let's get started and move to the next slide. As a public university, we are required to do fund accounting. And what that means is that we keep track of the funding we get based on who gives it to us, because there are sometimes restrictions around that money. And the first category of funds that we have, so we talk about them in 3 different colors, hence the stoplight visual here to kind of put in our minds that we're talking about red is restricted funds and make it more obvious. And if you hit the go button here, JD, there's a group of funds that based on who gives us those funds, they put restrictions on them as to how we can use them inside the university in terms of where they go within the university, and often in terms of what they pay for and what their purpose is within those units. In this category, we would include our state special appropriations, which, as you're probably aware, the law directs us to send those dollars to specific units within the university for particular purposes. But this category also includes some federal appropriations, primarily to the Agricultural Experiment Station and Extension. And this is where we would book our sponsored grants that again come from the federal government and industry and so forth for particular research projects, and our gifts income as well. Most donors, 99% of the gifts we receive are restricted as to unit within the university or purpose. So it might be to give it to the College of Design, but it might also be given to the College of Design for scholarships for students in landscape architecture. I mean, it can be very restricted. So that's one group of funds that we cannot move around the institution to solve problems or to address priorities outside of what they are given to us for. The second category of funding in yellow is more self-supporting. These are the businesses of the institution. We call them auxiliaries. They're yellow because they have kind of a neutral impact on the budget. They generate income by selling goods and services to particular individuals or organizations, and that's how they run their budget model for themselves. Again, we don't take the funds. Examples here would be the bookstore, parking, student housing, and dining. We don't take the funds that they generate through sales and move them to purposes completely different from what they were designed to support. Then the final category of funds in green, these are the monies from a budget perspective. So I'm a budget person. These are the monies we like the best because they are the most flexible. And here there's really 2 groups. If you want to hit the button, JD, there's two groups. Go ahead and do it again. I want to talk first about this bottom category. This is our miscellaneous other funds category. And here you're going to have, these are revenues that are generated by university departments differentially based on the activities that they're involved in. So it might be fees, it might be sales income, it could be clinical income. So if you think about the dental school, for example, as part of their work, their primary objective, of course, is to educate dentists, our future dentists. But incidental to that, and as part of that mission and part of their work, they provide dental services and charge for those services. The dental income then from that, the clinical income from that, is available on an unrestricted basis to the dental school. But again, we don't move it away from the dental school and give it to, you know, the College of Liberal Arts, for example. So it's unrestricted to the unit, but not necessarily to the institution. The large, what's referenced in green here, the large bucket of funding made up of tuition and the state O&M appropriation, those are the large unrestricted grant revenues to the institution. These are the dollars that we really use to solve problems and to address priorities across the institution. So these dollars allow us to take two paths: to take care of the university, to address safety issues or pay for things that our external partners won't necessarily pay for, things like equipment, administrative functions in HR and finance, compliance requirements related to reporting and monitoring, utilities, custodial services, etc. Plus, secondly, they allow us to serve our students and deliver on our mission throughout the university through funding faculty and all their needs, through funding career services, libraries, the extension service, and so on and so forth. It really provides that edge of excellence in so many ways throughout all of our colleges and campuses. If you go to the next slide then, and taking this structure of, or picture, if you will, of red, yellow, and green, this is how it actually displays across all of our revenue sources in terms of their proportion of our total budget for the current year. FY21, which is $3.9 billion, you can see that in the red are restricted funds. Again, those that we can't move around to solve problems, that's 36% of our revenues. An additional 9% this year comes from those businesses, kind of neutral on the overall budget balancing game. And then 14% as the unrestricted at the unit level goes to them to fund their operations, and it's very important. But then the green, the dark green, is the 41% that allows the university to really address the needs wherever they are. And if you go to the next slide, this pulls out separately then from that pie chart, pulls out the two largest unrestricted, although I will say this is state appropriation and tuition. And by state appropriation on this slide, it includes the restricted state specials. So it's the state appropriations for operations compared to tuition. And of just those two buckets, it has this year shifted. So 58% comes from tuition, 42% comes from the state appropriation. And over time, that maroon portion of this pie has grown and the gold portion has decreased. That has happened all over the country. We are not unique in that. That's a very common thing. And it's taken a long period of time to get there, but we wanted to share that with you. And then if we go to the next slide, and actually the next couple, we're going to talk about tuition. So here, we just wanted to provide, just for background information, the tuition rates. These are the undergraduate tuition rates, resident and non-resident by campus, that are in place for the current year. And the fact, this chart also shows that we made the decision to hold these rates flat for the current year that we are in. Across all campuses, all tuition and fees were held flat in recognition of the challenges that students and families are facing as a result of the pandemic. And if you go to the next slide, this shows the change in the rates over time. Again, these are the undergraduate resident rates here now on this particular slide. And this really shows that beginning with the 2014-15 biennium, the university began a very concerted effort and sometimes in partnership with the state to make that happen, to hold the tuition rate growth down in really two different ways. First, in keeping the growth on the Twin Cities campus at or below the rate of inflation over this period of time, and to hold down the increase on the rates for Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester at a rate below inflation or at zero, thus creating a larger differential between them and the Twin Cities campus, and really a lesser differential between them and other four-year institutions in the region. And you can see that over this period of time, a student that was with us during this period of time would have experienced an average annual tuition rate increase of 1.3% on the Twin Cities campus and about 0.5% on each of our other system campuses. And then moving on to the other revenues, I want to speak just a little bit about that other group of miscellaneous funds. So if you go to the next slide, this represents now, if you set aside the state appropriation and tuition and just look at the rest of the budget, that's about 60% of our annual revenues, over half of which in this other category are restricted. Those are the red ones. So that's the sponsored grants that fund our sponsored research and sponsored public service projects. Again, very, very restricted by the source of those dollars as to what they can be used for. But it also includes grants, contracts, federal appropriations, gifts, and endowment income. Those are all restricted. I think that there's a couple of general points I want to make here before we dive into a couple of more specific topics you might find of interest. But just in general on these funds, I think there are a couple of important points. One is that there are incentives in our internal budgeting process and model for units to try and grow these revenues, which we work at all the time. It's a difficult thing to do, but we are successful. Bit by bit, we are growing those funds and succeeding. With a couple of exceptions, as I mentioned earlier, the sources on this slide, as they grow these revenues, they are generally expected to cover all their direct costs associated with the activities that generate these revenues, and when possible to cover overhead. But it also provides them that little bit of extra edge for program excellence and advancement. And so if they can generate income to address some of their emerging priorities, they have the incentive to do so because the revenue stays with them, which we'll talk about more coming up here in a minute. And then the second point I wanted to make here is related primarily to the sponsored revenue, which is an extremely important revenue source for the institution and really for the state and the globe, because it supports our research mission. It brings discoveries, generates knowledge, creates new businesses, brings talented people into the university and into the state. But the point I want to make from a budgeting perspective is that the sponsors do not pay 100% of the costs associated with research. The university must use those unrestricted dollars that I've been talking about, and key among them the state O&M appropriation, in order to support research and make it happen. So the equipment, the compliance requirements, the safety requirements, monitoring and fiscal management, library materials, the technology infrastructure, all those things necessary to do research depend on those other sources to supplement what comes in with the grants. So it's important to understand that big piece of our research mission, while the basis of the funding is restricted, it relies on those unrestricted dollars to make it possible. So if you move to the next slide, JD, please. We have a couple here of particular interest. This one touches on the endowment, and the endowment earnings is one of those other revenues that was just on the previous slide. It is restricted primarily, but the endowment itself is $4 billion between that managed by the university and the portion managed by the foundation. And it's the earnings off of that endowment that come into the university accounts on an annual basis to be spent. So of the $4 billion right now, about $180 million comes in on an annual basis to be spent. And 99% of that is restricted to purpose. So let me give you an example. If somebody gave the university a large, let's say they gave the university $20 million, to support a couple or however many they can of faculty positions in engineering, as an example. They're going to give that to the university, put that restriction on it. We cannot take that $20 million that's in the $4 billion. We cannot take that $20 million and use it to build a building, for example. It has to stay there to generate the annual payout, the annual income to support the costs of those chairs in engineering. We can't even take the payout and move it to support faculty chairs and faculty in nursing, for example. It has to support what the donor said it was for. And don't get me wrong, this is extremely important even to that unit that provides the funding necessary for those chairs. That's important for that college. And it frees up, if you will, or takes pressure off some of the other revenue sources. If we can get it this way, we absolutely will, because it takes pressure off our unrestricted sources then to provide that same faculty chair in this example. So that's the endowment and how it works. The second piece that we thought might be of interest is to have a little conversation about our balances. And really the balances at the University of Minnesota are really no different than what the state maintains for its cash balance and what it is necessary to responsibly run the organization on a day-to-day basis. You can think about it like a checkbook, in that the amount in there is going to range and vary day to day. And just before the pandemic, it was ranging from about 800 million to 1.2 billion. I haven't tracked it since the pandemic as closely, but that was our kind of normal range on any given day. And those funds include unrestricted and restricted funds, but it's generally managed to be about 100 days of normal operations or cash on hand, if you want to think about it that way. An amount that is reasonable and necessary to support our daily cash flow needs and to support our bond ratings and the need to address emergencies. And I want to also say that it is actively managed as part of our budget process. So we know where the balances are, we know what makes them up, we know what they're for, and we have conversations with the units every year about the level of their balances, and again, what makes them up, what is possible in terms of supporting their budget by using those balances and so forth. So it is an actively managed part of our institution and of our overall financial model at the institution. And if you go to the next slide, JD, where there is sometimes confusion is around balances versus the central reserves. We have, by board policy, a goal of holding $25 million or 4% of our state appropriation in what's called central reserves. And this is a set of funds that is designed to help us with unanticipated needs. In most recent years, the appropriation, the level of the appropriation generates through this policy a goal of holding about $27 million in central reserves for that rainy day. And as I'm sure you understand, it is raining now and it has been since last March. So if you go to the next slide, JD, you can see here that we anticipated just prior to the pandemic that our June 30th, 2020 central reserve balance would be almost $50 million. Then the pandemic hit and the Board of Regents approved an authorization level of spending $35 million of that 49 on addressing a portion of the pandemic related shortfalls, both in FY20 and in FY21. So if all goes according to plan, our reserve will drop from 49 million to about 14 million by the end of this fiscal year. And then we will spend time and effort over the next however many years to build that back up again toward that goal of 27 million. We were exceeding it, we were doing well, but we hope to get back up to the 27 million for that one. Okay, and then if you move on.
Oh, Ms. Tonneson, I was wondering when do you,
want me to
yes.
pause on the revenue side before we go to
I believe so. I think I was gonna maybe pause before when you got to balances, but if you believe that this is a good time to pause too before we get into expenditures, I would like
Sure.
to see if members have any questions. It's a lot to absorb.
Yes.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a really quick question, something that I hadn't noticed before when I was on the committee. When you showed us the resident and non-resident tuition rates, Moorhead and Rochester were exactly the same for resident, non-resident. And Morris was just slightly higher, about $2,080, where the Twin Cities was $20,918 more, so significantly more. And I'm just wondering why is that? Why is there, a couple of them that are exactly the same? Morris is just slightly higher, but the Twin Cities is over 20,000, almost 21,000 more. I'm just wondering why across the
Ms.
two.
Coniston.
Sure. Chair Bernardi, Representative O'Neill, it is because, let me explain why there isn't a differential for our assistant campuses. So some time ago, the strategic decision was made for Crookston and Rochester in particular to not have a non-resident differential. And that's really solely for recruitment purposes. It felt it was really a hurdle too high in terms of recruiting non-resident students. And they weren't getting enough to even make that differential worth it from a financial perspective. So they could actually get more students on campus, a lot more if they did not charge that differential. So those, a long time, I think even 20 plus years ago or even longer, that decision was made for Crookston. And then when the Rochester campus was being built, that was a strategy that they proposed for that as well. Morris and Duluth have a little bit more ability to recruit non-resident students, so they have accepted and believe that it is a reasonable strategy to have a somewhat differential between non-resident and resident. But on the Twin Cities campus, where the demand is higher, we are able to attract more non-resident students and more international students. And so there is an understanding that as that rate goes up, we don't lose in terms of recruiting numbers of students. And so that's why there's that difference. I will tell you, the Twin Cities rate right now this year is 10th out of 14 in the Big Ten. So we are not even in the middle right now in terms of what we charge for non-resident rates. We've been trying to grow that differential so that we could be closer to the middle of the Big Ten. And it's just that others keep increasing their rates more than us. So we were 12th, or no, we were 8th last year, and now this year we're 10th. So.
Representative O'Neill, do you have a follow-up?
Very quickly, thank you, Madam Chair. Just because the Rochester campus is fairly new, is there a long-term plan to, I'm assuming that it's eventually going to be a very popular campus with Mayo right there. Is there a plan in the future to do a little bit higher for the non-resident, non-state?
Ms. Tennyson.
Chair Bernardi, Representative O'Neill, that is always an option on the table for the chancellor if they want to propose that as part of their overall strategy for enrollment. They have not yet. As far as I know, it isn't on the near-term horizon. They are still trying to grow into the size they want to be. But as we go along every year, it is an option always to discuss that.
Representative O'Neill, okay. Are there any members, do members have any other questions, or we can move on? And then if you have more questions, we will pause again. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Tonneson.
All right. So I'll pick up on expenditures. There's really just a couple of slides here at a very high level, 30,000 foot look at expenditures for the institution. This slide shows you now, this is limited to our non-sponsored budget. So if you set aside the sponsored grants that are dedicated to particular research and public service projects, if you set those aside, those are often multi-year and they're budgeted on a multi-year basis. So if you just look at our annual budgeted expenditures of $3.4 billion for the current year, this chart shows you two different ways that we track those dollars and that spending. On the left, you see the budget by object of expenditure. And these are kind of the natural spending categories. And what you see here is, not surprisingly, we are a people place. Education institution is all about people. So 62% of our spending is on salaries and fringe for our employees. And then you can see the other categories there that are kind of the natural breaks of spending in operating budgets across the institution. On the right side of this chart, you see the same 3.4 billion, but displayed by function. We code all of our spending into these categories based on definitions that we share with all other higher ed institutions. They're given to us. And so we code that way so that we can compare across institutions where it makes sense to do so. I want to say that on this particular chart, then the research portion of this pie, that yellow 11%, is low because remember the sponsored research is not in this pie chart. So this just represents research that's funded with all those other funds of the institution. If you were to add research in here, it would be 25% of the total. Public service would maybe jump up to 7 or 8%, and all of the other categories would go down about 1%. But that's another way that we track it. And then a third way we track it, if you flip to the next chart, is just the change year over year. We actually look at expenditures in many different ways, but this one just shows the annual change year compared to the prior year. And there's a couple of points I would like to make here. The first being that, and not surprisingly, that we can have really large non-recurring expenditures in a given year that skew this up and then down. So a good example of that would be a year in which we have large enterprise system project work, when we completely redo the general ledger, for example, our financial system or our HR system. That will increase expenditures one time in one year, show a big increase, and then the next year you see it, because that disappears, you see a very low change in expenditures. And you can just see that in the numbers here. Some of them are really high, and then the more normal years are right around that 1 to 1.5% growth rate. The other point to make here is that, as all institutions do, the university has some categories of spending that grow at a rate faster than inflation. And pick your inflation index. It doesn't matter if it's the higher education price index or the CPI or the personal consumption index, any of those. Some of our spending categories consistently grow faster than those rates. And some of them are unique kind of to higher education institutions like ours. So the lab and medical services, for example, or library subscriptions, those types of things. But we also have healthcare that other organizations have that grow fast and so forth. And this is really here just to point out that it is a challenge in our budget to address those rates of inflation on top of regular inflation on general supplies, for example. We have to deal with these in addition to priority spending. So it's just an additional challenge, if you will, as we put our balanced budget together. And then before, maybe I'll pause just really quickly because the next section here is about how our budget process and how we make decisions. So let me pause just again to see if there's any questions before I move on to that
Yes,
piece.
thank you. Representative Daniels, and then Representative Sandell is on deck. Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious if you go back up to that pie chart that has the salaries.
Representative Daniels, we don't hear you very well. Could you try to adjust something?
I tried. I've had some technical
There we
issues.
go. That's better.
Okay, loose wire.
I hate when that happens.
I know it's very fussy. There's a pie chart in there just a few screens back, and it talks. Yeah, that one. Thank you.
It's still difficult to hear Representative Daniels, and I want everyone to be able to hear your voice. We didn't lose you, did we? Okay, let's see.
I think we lost Representative Daniels. I'll connect with him.
Okay, Representative Daniels will now be on deck, and we will get back to him as soon as we gain connection with him. Representative Sandell.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Tennyson. On slide 16, the graph on the left-hand side, object of expenditures, 62% is on the salaries and fringes. On the other expenditures by function, just 26% is on instruction. Can you, I think I understand that, but could you be a little bit more explicit in how and why that great difference is there?
Sure. Chair Bernardi, Representative Sandell. So on the
Ms.
left
Tennyson.
on the left side, the salary and fringe would be for all employees, regardless of what they do at the university. So that's for people who mow our lawns. It's for the people in the budget office. You know, it's people that are working in a lab, for example, as well as the faculty or the teaching specialists that are in the classroom. So it is everybody. So regardless of function. When you look on the right, every expenditure that we do, it has a primary function attached to it. So my primary function that's attached to my salary and fringe is going to be coded as institutional support. If I'm a faculty member in the College of Liberal Arts, my primary role is going to be one of instruction. So that my salary in that case would be under the instruction bucket. But if we have other colleges who have their faculty are split and they'll have large portions of their time on research, their salary might actually be split. So a piece of it's coded as research, a piece of it's coded as instruction, a piece of it's coded as public service, as an example. So it just depends on the specific situation in terms of how we're coded according to function. Does that help?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Sandell.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Tennyson. I have one other quick question, and that is the 11% of expenditures for student aid. Could you describe what kind of aid that is and who it is who qualifies and what sort of application process there is for that?
Ms. Tennyson.
Thank
Sure. Chair Bernardi, Representative Sandell. So that would be all forms of financial aid that come through the university. So that is gift aid or grants that are based on income. That's the state grant program, or the university has a need-based aid program that's totally based on filling out the FAFSA form and the qualifications in terms of adjusted gross income and so forth that are associated with that, as well as the merit-based aid that is given out by departments, for example, that there might be a dance program that has a scholarship attached to it. But again, those restricted dollars or unrestricted that come in for particular scholarships that are merit-based and not need-based, that would be in there as well. So it's a whole wide variety of all forms of aid to students. In terms of applications, again, that varies. If you fill out a FAFSA, you're automatically applying for need-based financial aid. If you have access to opportunities for merit-based scholarships through your discipline or your college, there might be a separate application process for those.
Madam Chair, Ms. Tennyson, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank Representative Daniels.
No, come on.
Yeah, wait, I can hear you, Representative Daniels. Way to go.
Man, I had a reboot, so I apologize. I got some touchy wires here that's connected to the house. That question might have been answered already. I was just curious why the salaries and fringe is at 62% on the left part of the screen, and the actual instruction is at 26.
Representative Daniels, I am so sorry. I was just hoping we could maybe faintly hear you, but it's really difficult. When you jiggle that cord, it seemed like it worked.
Right. I'm gonna have to get on maintenance. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll just text or email or something.
Chair Bernardi, I did hear his question. If you want me to answer.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Representative Daniels, our testifier did hear it. So she will proceed, she'll repeat the question and then can you just tell me, is it Tennyson?
It's Tennyson.
Tonneson. Okay,
It's Norwegian. It's Norwegian. It's my husband's name. It's Tonneson.
Okay, excellent, Ms. Tonneson.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking. So Chair Bernardi, Representative Daniels, you're correct. We did talk about that a little bit when you were having your technical difficulties, but I think I'll just repeat it because it's confusing to people. Over on the left, the 62% and all the other pieces are regardless of function. So that's 62% of our total budget is spent on salaries, but that's for every employee, no matter what they do at the university. If they do research, if they do administration, if they are a custodian, you know, if they are in the budget office, it doesn't matter on the left side of the chart. That's just the total for that type of spending. On the right side, then, we code our expenditures based on the primary function of that individual, plus all of the supplies, et cetera, that go with them. So in my case, my salary is coded as institutional support. I don't do instruction. So my the salary that I am paid would be under the institutional support portion of the pie. The people whose primary purpose is to deliver instruction are in that instruction piece, as well as the supplies that go along with the instruction. So the art supplies and the, you know, whatever the technology to deliver the instruction and so forth is in that piece of the pie. But if I'm a faculty member whose primary role is research, my salary is going to be in the research portion of the pie. Does that help?
Yes, if you can hear me, that does help. I'd like to get more details. I'm sorry, Chair. Well, I got everything popping here. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to get more details at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see any more questions before we move on. I just have a question for you myself. When $3.9 billion is your budget, yep, and your expenditures are 3.4, the 0.5 or $500 million, what do you call that again?
That is the sponsored research.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's the difference. Yep.
Thank you. Okay,
Sure.
Ms. Tonneson. Oh, Representative O'Neill looks like she has a question before we proceed. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought maybe the other two might ask it. If you could go back to that slide that you were just at, 16. Thank you. Could you just give me a couple examples of a couple of the pie slices on the right? Public service, academic support, student services, and the institutional support. Could you just give me just a couple quick examples of what those categories mean? I used to do accounting and I'm like, I'm not quite, I mean, I think I know, but it'd be nice to know for sure what you think they are.
Sure.
Ms. Tonneson.
Sure. Yep. Chair Bernardi, Representative O'Neill, and these definitions of these categories, I just want to say it again, they're given to us by the federal government actually. And so we take those definitions and try to apply them to our activity, as do all universities that receive federal money. So a few examples are institutional support, the budget office, the president's office is institutional support, the things that as well as some kind of overarching infrastructure costs that support the whole institution and all campuses. The public service, a good example of public service would be Minnesota Extension Service. Almost everything they do is coded as public service. Our clinics are often coded as public service. And then there are even projects that colleges get involved in that are primarily working with an organization in the community that would be considered public service. Academic support is going to be things like, think about the college's administrative functions, or the career services would be in student services, but the college dean's offices, for example, are not institutional support. They don't support the whole institution. They support the academic mission of that college. And so that's an example of academic support. It also, libraries would often, a lot of what the library does would be considered academic support, or our research infrastructure, the offices that work there could be split between research and academic support. Student services would be things like advising, career services, those types of things that are designed around the non-classroom support of students. I think those are the ones you asked about. Does that help?
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That helps to put a little more understanding behind what those categories mean. I've never done your type of accounting. I used to do nonprofit and business accounting. And so even for me, those categories, I couldn't quite grasp what that, what could all be in that. And I'm sure
Right.
other members have that same question. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Proceed, Ms. Tonneson.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the budget process. We've talked through the revenues and expenditures, but how do we make it all come together to arrive at a balanced budget on an annual basis? And the process really starts with a conversation about some high-level variables that we need to decide on every year that guide us through delivering a budget. And it starts with the questions that you see here. On the resource side, we ask ourselves every year, what is our strategy around tuition? What's happening with enrollment? Can it grow in some places? Is it decreasing in others? Do we need to maintain it? What do we want to plan for internal reallocation, or the practice we use where we decrease revenues in one area, we decrease spending and revenues in one area to move those existing resources to a different priority? How do we want to plan for that within the budget? Are there opportunities to grow those other revenues in ways that help the budget? And of course, I didn't put it on here, but another one we think about every year is what's happening with our state appropriation and what should we plan for in that regard. And then on the cost side, again, we're people driven. And so our compensation strategy, what we want to do with salary increases and what's happening to us on the fringe benefit side, particularly with healthcare, we have to look at that. We also talk about how do we want to shape our program enhancement with the strategic plan and the direction that the strategic plan gives us in that. What should we be investing in? We look at, on the expenditure side also, where can we reduce spending, either through efficiencies or through scope change? What can we stop doing? We talked about the research and the fact that if it's growing, we have to provide infrastructure support for that. So what's happening there? And then, of course, student services is always on the table as well. So those high-level questions are asked by the president and her leadership team. They have conversations about that. And then we go into the process. Slide, please. We go into the process and meet with every one of our units every year. Much like you're meeting with us today, we meet with each one of our units. And when I say units, these are the ones I'm talking about. I won't read through this whole list, but we have what we call resource responsibility centers. And those are on the academic side, on the left side of this chart, are each one of our system campuses and each one of our Twin Cities colleges, as well as the experiment station and extension, are considered academic units of the institution. On the right side, these are the support units of the institution. These are either, many of them have institution-wide responsibilities. Some of them are focused more just on the Twin Cities. But this is the level of the institution we hold accountable for managing the budgets that represent their activities. And this is the level that we meet with every year in the budget process. Slide, please. And when I say we, so this is kind of about who does what. The president is the one that sets up the questions that I just talked through a couple slides ago, and meets with her leadership team to refine the answers to those questions for planning purposes. And then she delegates to what we call the budget committee, which is a group of leaders and myself that together develop the budget instructions out to the units, send them out, and then we meet with all of the units and have conversations about their challenges, their needs and issues, as well as their opportunities and their priorities and their proposals. So as an example, we send out budget instructions to our chancellors on each one of our campuses. They respond to those instructions with requests, with proposed changes, with just information about where their budget sits. And as we work through that process, we try to put it together in a way that through an iterative process back and forth, we develop a recommendation to the president on how we can take her goals, her answers to those original questions, and work with the units to develop a planned set of recommendations that balance the budget. And I'll walk you through an example here in a minute. But ultimately, we go through that iterative process until she is happy with the full package, which she then brings to the Board of Regents for review and approval. And of course, it goes through an iterative process with them as well. They might change it before they approve it. But ultimately, that's the goal every June prior to the start of the fiscal year. And within that process, we go to the next slide, we have what we call the budget model, which is really a tool that we use inside the institution to help us get to the unit level decisions that we need to make. It doesn't make the decisions, but it helps us set up the framework for questions that need to be answered at that unit level. So within the budget model as it works today, on the left side, you see a lot of those earned revenues I was talking about earlier. Based on what the unit does, they generate tuition, they get gifts, they sell things and so forth. 100% of those revenues that they generate go directly to them, whatever they are. And when I say them, I mean the academic units of the institution. So the system campuses and the Twin Cities colleges. In addition to that, you see down on the lower left, the box that says allocated state appropriation. We do not allocate our appropriation by formula. It's not a formula-driven distribution of the state appropriation. The state specials go exactly where the law says they have to go. The O&M appropriation is allocated on a incremental base plus minus process, just like the state does with its state agencies. We give each of our units, they each have a base O&M appropriation, and through this budget process every year, we give out increases, and if we get cut, we have to decrease. So it's a base plus minus process. But ultimately, that state appropriation goes 100% to the academic units. So if you think about it, that means that 100% of the revenues are going to and are recorded in the accounts for all of the Twin Cities colleges and the system campuses. That means they have to have 100% of the expenses as well. So they pay for, with that money, all their direct expenses, their faculty salaries and equipment, for example, but they also have to pay for their portion of all of the central support functions, which you see on the right. So for example, the budget office, there's only 3 of us, but in the budget office, our budget is actually in the bottom support service cost pool that you see in that far right box. And that gets allocated out by formula as a charge to each one of our academic units. And there's different formulas for each one of the support units over on the right. So in the end, the academic units have all of the earned revenue of the institution, and they have all of the costs. And I'm a budget geek. I could spend hours talking about this and the advantages of this type of a system. I won't go into that today, but if you have any questions on it at any time, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But again, this is just a tool because it helps us make decisions. And if you go to the next slide, I'll walk you through how the actual decisions work. So I call this our 3-legged stool of resource allocation and cost allocation. And I'm going to start on the bottom. The first leg of the stool is that central decision-making process, where I said the president is the one who has conversations and decides how she wants to direct the institution in terms of tuition changes, internal budget cuts, salary increases, and so on and so forth. She makes those decisions. We turn those into financial estimates attached to each one of those decisions in a way that makes the budget balanced. So if you move up to the next stool, that budget framework is nothing more than a 30,000-foot plan for how we're going to balance the budget, adding revenues based on the decisions and adding costs based on the decisions in a way that balances the budget. That plan then at the institutional level gets turned into a unit level conversation through the budget model that I just talked about. So that framework is translated down to a unit level by the budget model. And I'll give you an example. Let's do a very quick and easy one. Let's say we're going to increase tuition 1%. We're going to increase salaries 1%. And the president wants to invest in the library. Because of our budget model, we know that a 1% tuition increase is going to generate X millions of dollars for our College of Liberal Arts. But we also know that college is going to have X amount of salary increase expense because of our decision. And there, because of the budget model, we know when we invest in the library, a portion of that is charged to the College of Liberal Arts, and we know how much that's going to be. So just using those three examples, we can say, does that tuition revenue increase completely pay for your cost increases, or doesn't it? If it does not, then we say, okay, are we going to force you to cut your budget somewhere else to help pay for those costs? Or do we have state money that we can potentially, an increase there that we can potentially give to you to help pay for those costs? Now, there's lots more around this than that simple example, but I hope that helps kind of explain how we take the high level plan and priorities and apply them at a unit level, all with the design of trying to make each unit as successful as we possibly can, given our constrained resources, in a way that's responsible and that balances overall, because we do have to obviously balance the budget at the end of the game. That's sort of the end game in this process, and the responsible thing to do. And I think it's important to understand that we make decisions in an all funds context. So that change in the state appropriation combined with the changes in all of the other revenues, which are different for different units, allows us to achieve our overall goals and yet try to make each unit as successful as we can within that suite of available resources. And as I'm sure as you do your work here at the state, you can appreciate that we can't do everything that we would like to do. I often say that a good budget process is one in which all the units are kind of equally unhappy because nobody ever gets everything that we want. But we do strive for a process that is comprehensive and open and strategic, and it gets us to a balanced budget every year that we can feel confident in. So that's very quick on our process. And again, I can go into more details if people have questions, but I didn't want to belabor all the details either. So hope that's helpful.
Well,
We'll take questions now, or we can turn it over to Myron for some closing remarks too.
Okay, let's take one. We have one question up here. We'll take Representative Albright's question. Then we'll have Myron Franz do the closing remarks. And I just want you to go back to good job on the slides, by the way. I wanted to, the part where it says ICR, RRC, I too, like Representative, I was in financial management and business, as well as in grants and that type of thing. And acronyms used to be something we used a lot, and I do not know what RRC means, and I couldn't figure it out. And I'm sorry, I don't know what ICR means.
Sure. Chair Bernardi, RRC is Resource Responsibility Center. That list I showed you of the 50 units, that's what we call them, Resource Responsibility Centers. That's the RRC. ICR stands for Indirect Cost Recovery. That is a form of revenue that we get primarily from the federal government, but from other sources. When we get a sponsored grant, they sometimes will pay an extra % on top of the direct costs of the grant for overhead. And that's what that is. So if we get a $1 million grant from the federal government, from NIH, they will pay us another $530,000 on top of the $1 million to pay for overhead. Now that is not enough to pay for all of the overhead, but it helps. Some agencies and organizations pay 0. Some pay 10%, 15%, all the way up to 53%. It just depends on their particular operation. But that's what that stands for, Indirect Cost Recovery.
Thank you. And then Representative Albright, I'll let you make a decision if you want to ask your question before or after we have this question answered, if you like Mr. Franz to do his closing remarks.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'm actually going to direct my questions towards Mr. Franz, so if he can roll up his sleeves, we'll get going here. Mr. Franz, back in 2019, the MMB put out a study that said that median household income in Minnesota has remained fairly flat from 06 to 16, even with adjusted for inflation, yet tuition at most institutional higher educational types have increased during that same time frame. If in fact,
oh, sorry.
yeah, if in fact, tuition has only grown at, one at most 1.5% to being flat over the last several years, why do we continuously hear individuals say that they can't afford to go to college?
Mr. Myron Franz, welcome to the committee. And don't even let you present, and we're already asking you questions. Not surprising, because we know you're
ready
wealth
for
of information.
He
So
was dressed for success.
welcome to the committee, and you may proceed with Representative Albright's question.
Thank you, Chair Bernardi, and thank you, Representative Albright. Now, I dress for you all. I mean, this is, I may be home, but doesn't mean you can't dress for the occasion. I'm not going to say whether I have jeans on or a suit pants on.
Don't stand up.
No. So, but thank you for the question. One of the things I think that, well, the rest of you should know that Representative Albright and I have had a long history of asking each other good and hard questions that I think are designed to understand each other's position better. I think Representative Albright would have to admit most of the time my position is better than his, but we'll go with his question at this time anyway. No.
And can everybody hear Mr. Franz all right? Very good enough.
Good. I'm digging. Thank Madam Chair. Good. I'm digging a hole for everybody. That's good. I just
can
want
hear
to
you
make,
better now. Thank you.
Well, good. I did turn my speaker up a little bit. I think one of the challenges of any family, though, for higher education is, other things are going up a lot faster than education in Minnesota. For example, healthcare and other housing in some areas. So I think one of the challenges that any family faces, that some of us have here on this call, and certainly I have as a family, face a decision on what kind of resources can you bring to bear for that tuition for your children. And I think, and for those adults who have to do it on their own. So the fact that the median adjusted income has stayed relatively flat and tuition, I think, at least at the University of Minnesota, has been fairly low increase for the last number of years, I think speaks to the tension, that the understandable economic tension that's there, that I think we at the university are concerned about and want to make sure that we are affordable for those people who want to attend from Minnesota or from all over the country and all over the world. So that's a constant tension, and you will see that tension play out later this year in May and June, when the Board of Regents will take a look at this information, because it's their decision to ultimately decide what is that correct balance. When do we have to increase tuition to pay for additional costs or unexpected increases, and when can we really hold the line? And we had no tuition increase this year, and certainly our goal would be not to increase tuition above inflation in the future, but that's something for the board to decide in May or June. So, I can't go into any more than that, Representative Albright, that I think the tensions that all families face or individuals face in making that tuition decision is based upon what resources are available and what can you allocate to yourself or to your family for that tuition.
Madam Chair, I just have a follow-up for,
Albright.
thank you, for Mr. Franz. So in the context, Mr. Franz, of what you just said in terms of, the allocation of resources and whatnot, I want to speak to you a little bit about allocation from a perspective of the legislature put into statute a number of years ago, the Design for Shared Responsibility Protocol, where the student, the parent, and the taxpayer also all have a role to play in investing in our future workforce. Two-part question. The first one is, do you still support the current allocation for that design for shared responsibility? And in the context of, if we stay the same, are we forcing independent students to really actually rely more on debt instruments rather than an increase in some other avenue for paying for their college education.
You know, I'm going to ask
Mr. Franz.
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Vice President Tonneson, who's more familiar with that allocation percentage than I am, to answer that particular question.
Ms. Tonneson.
Chair Bernardi, Representative Albright, if you're referring to at one time there was a goal, I believe, of the state to fund the 66, the 2/3.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, I think would I support the current distribution, the current allocation or plan? I would say yes. I've been through many sessions, if you will, with many different presidents who I guess instilled in me the understanding that we should have a partnership here. And so I remember even particular requests that were built around the notion that the state should be a third, the university should be a third, and the students should be a third. And whether you agree with the actual allocation percentages that are there, I think that notion of partnership, that we understand that we can't, none of us can do it on our own, is still valid and still very important. We don't track the percent of instructional costs like they used to do in the law that was taken out some time ago. So we don't actually track the money that way. We think about it more in terms of what it can support overall at the institution. So that would be my answer to that piece of it.
Representative Albright, do you have a follow-up before we move on to our remarks by Mr. Franz, and then we will open it up for questions for members.
Madam Chair, I think the follow-up will probably happen over an offline conversation between Mr. Franz and Ms. Tonneson. So I'll close with that, and I do thank both of them for coming today. It's a difficult situation that when in a very complex budget situation, and I certainly appreciate their efforts and their willingness to provide the information to us. And I just want to thank them for their time today.
Okay, Mr. Franz, would you like to wrap up? And we have Representative Cleaborn that is all ready to ask a question when you have made your closing remarks, as Ms. Tonneson mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this won't take too long. I wanted to summarize a couple of issues, and thank you for asking us to come back and give you more detailed information about our budget process. But as most of you will recall, when President Gable was here the last time before this committee, she talked about the 2025 plan and really wanted to emphasize that the direction that the university is going has been endorsed and being reviewed by the Board of Regents. But the key really is to make sure that we articulate very clearly to the state of Minnesota and to you all what it is we're trying to accomplish. What are those goals, and how are we measuring our success to getting to those goals? We really believe in being transparent and being accountable. And one of the things we're doing, this is the part that I wanted to tell you that you might not have known about. That is, the president has asked me to lead an effort to really take a look at how can we improve the quality of our education, the quality of our teaching and research and service at the university, and at the same time looking at, can we improve the efficiencies of the way we manage the university so that we can reduce the overall burden on every dollar that we receive. I mean, obviously the tuition dollars we receive, the money from the state, are all very important, and we want to make sure that we utilize the highest percentage that we can for research, teaching, and service. So we're now in the process of going through a fairly lengthy analysis of where can the university provide more direct services. We really call it modernizing the university structure to better support the functions of the university. So that's a process we're beginning now. It's going to take several months to go through this process, analyze what opportunities are available, and then it'll take time to implement. But our goal is really for the long term to make sure that we take the opportunity now, especially with the COVID challenges that we have and the budget challenges that we have, take this opportunity now to make sure we are focusing on providing the best, most efficient support for the university that we can. So I just wanted to follow up on that and let people know that we're engaged in that. We'll be reporting back out to you as we make decisions about that going forward. But I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any more questions. Thank you, Chair Bernardi.
Thank you. Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members, I ask for your patience for just a minute. To Ms. Tonneson, I would like to challenge your thought about 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, okay? The 1/3 that the state pays is in fact coming from our families. That's their money, okay? The 1/3 that they pay in tuition, that's their money. So I want to make sure that when we say the state should do 2/3, I would like to see that third that they pay to the state also go to the university so that the students aren't burdened with an unbelievable amount of debt, right? So in that challenge, I would also like to know, one of the reasons I ran for office is because I felt the legislature was not holding its obligation to our students and our public institutions. I would like to know from the university, if you would go back, let's just say a decade, what was the request that you put into the state? You've said to us, this is what we need in order to hold the line or to provide the services that we are required to serve, to do. You know, outreach, academics, I just lost the third one, research, thank you. So that's your mission, and that's the amount of money that you needed. And then I wanna know also, you know, you've given us the chart today with the percentage of tuition increase, right? So what is that cost, that additional cost that we've put on to our students that the state didn't do their share? That's a really important piece, the percentages. Let's look at those. So if we're going to hold the university accountable for the percentage that they've charged our students, let's hold the legislature also accountable for the part that we didn't do to deliver for our institutions. You know, right now I'm hearing a comparison of apples and oranges, but if it's a partnership, we need to both hold up our end of the game. So that's one of the things I would just challenge you on.
Ms. Tonneson.
Chair Bernardi, yeah, that's a complicated set of ideas, actually, because as I think about it from the budget side. Well, first, when I mentioned a third, that was how the actual request was put together at one point in time in terms of an increase. You know, we need this amount of money. We'll cut a third for a third. We'll ask you for a third, and so on. Obviously, the state, you saw from the pie chart that the state funds are about 18% of our total budget, and the tuition is around 25% of our total budget. So we're not, you know, it's not a third of the total cost. The part that I find, and it's a very good question, and it's very worth, you know, thinking through and asking for follow-up on in further conversation. But as I think about putting a budget together, I wish it was as easy as, I shouldn't say easy, but I wish it was the case where I could come up with a number to say, this is what we need. This is the number. Because as I'm sure you can appreciate with the vast, really variety of activities that we have going on at the university, that it's a process of determining what do we want to achieve, and do we have enough resources to achieve that, which we never do. And so then it's a process of